Hello, Tom Auger here. I want to do another Figma lesson. This one I'm just going to take apart a simple component, simple menu item. I see a lot of things out in the community, which I'm very grateful for. Beautiful artwork that's done, but often not properly built. I find that a lot of folks aren't using Figma to its full potential. So, for example, here I've chosen this Hope UI, which you can find out in the Figma community marketplace. It's free. It's actually really quite nice. It's got a lot of useful widgets and dashboard items and so forth. And as I was browsing through it and trying to see what I could modify, I was playing around with the menu and I thought, okay, well, let's see how we can change the menu text just to suit my needs. And I immediately saw that, okay, well, something's wrong here. As I start to type, the arrows moving along, and that just can't be right. And then digging into it a little deeper, I realized it was built not horribly. At least they used frames instead of rectangles and groups, so that's already something. But there's a lot of room for improvement. So, you ready? Let's dive in and look at the ways that we can improve this component and actually turn it into something truly functional that I think will be really useful. So I'm just going to option drag it off to the side here just to have a copy of it. The first thing I always like to do when I'm dissecting a component or an element is just to look at how it's built. So if we take a look here, it's a frame with auto layout turned on, which is already a good sign. And we're going to be using auto layout a lot. So I definitely recommend that you take a look at auto layout if you're not familiar with it. It's over here. Okay, and then what I'm looking for is just, well, we've got a number of nested elements that are probably not required. And then we have something else here, this notification. When I turn that on, that pushes this out, so that can't be right. So we've got a number of elements here that seem to be kind of grouped in a bit of a haphazard way. So the first thing I want to do is really just simplify the grouping that's here. We're trying to figure out what part of the group do we actually need and what don't we need. And as I look at these elements here, I don't think we need any of it. So I'm just going to right click on here and I'm going to choose ungroup. Sure, that's going to explode the design a little bit, but I'm not too worried about that. And I can probably get rid of this one as well and ungroup that. And so now we're left with, the raw elements here. Now you'll notice that they all went top to bottom, which is definitely not what we're looking for here. Let's just change this. I'm a big fan of naming things and labeling things well. It's going to serve you really well in the long term. So menu item, we're going to call this menu text. There we go. All right, so what are we going to do first of all to get back to this nice horizontal layout? Well, that's just with our auto layout. So right now the main item, the main frame, that's going to become our component. The main frame is set to auto layout, but it's set to vertical auto layout. So we're just going to go to horizontal auto layout. And it does make sense right now to use align left. We want to find a reasonable gap to put between here. We can do it by eye, by just clicking and dragging. It throws a gap. Or we can just type it in here into the gap. And that, as you can see, when we have auto layout applied, it applies the same gap to all the items. Now, these guys here, we actually don't want them to kind of follow the auto layout rules. We want them to be aligned to the right-hand side, and we want this to be over top of the chevron so that you're only seeing one or the other. At least that is what I believe was the designer's intention here. So there's a couple of ways that we can approach this. We can look at a more nested auto layout where we can then use the left and right sides and distribute them, and that'll assure that right hand aligned items are on the right and left aligned items on the left. But in this case, I don't even think we need to do that as complex as that. We can, and this is a great opportunity to learn a new technique, we're going to set both these two items here, we're going to set them to absolute positioning. So that pulls them out of the auto layout flow. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw a stroke on here just for now, just so we can kind of see. Oh, that's kind of funky. I wasn't expecting the rounded corners. For now, let's get rid of the rounded corners. Hey, we're just going to set those to 0 and 0 and 0. There we go, just for now. Okay, so this item and this item are now absolute position, which means that it doesn't matter what I do in auto layout anymore. Change these values. You can see it's actually tucking underneath, which is probably what we want in this case. So now we just have to sort of stick these where we want them and align them properly. So I'm going to take this guy, and then first I'm going to say, well, I want him centered. He is already centered, so there's going to be no change. However, clicking on the center button is a quick way of changing my vertical alignment to centering, and that is something that I'm going to want. And then I'm going to use the right hand alignment, and that's also going to set the right hand constraint to the right side. That way, if we get in here and if we have to resize the menu item, it comes along and is stuck to the right hand side. Now obviously we don't want it stuck that far over, so I can use the cursor keys. I'm actually hitting the arrow key on my keyboard and I'm counting to go backward. That's the one disadvantage I find of this technique when we're using absolute positioning, is that we don't have a great way of seeing what that right hand margin is. In my case, I nudged it by 1 pixel every time, and if you count, you know exactly how far you've gone. Otherwise, you start having to do some math here with the X coordinate, which is not fun. So that's the one downside. If you have a specific right hand margin you're trying to follow, then maybe you're better off going with the auto layout approach. That being said, we also want to do the same thing with this guy. So he's already set to absolute positioning, but we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go right alignment and center alignment, and we're just going to move that guy to where I think it should go. And if I want to just see it a bit more precisely, there, turn off the notification. And I think I want the notification to actually be above the drop down. So we're going to, whoops, the drop down got dragged inside the notification here. We're just going to move that up there. That way, it, you know, the stacking order, the bottom is actually the more frontmost layer. I've always disliked that about Figma, but that's just the way it is. The bottom item is in front of the item above it. All right, so that's good. So now we've already increased the functionality of this so we can set our menu width, and presumably typing in here does not affect the positioning of the items, which is probably what we want. Now you notice that if I make a menu item too long, it can go underneath here. You can decide as the designer whether you want to make that a design time decision, how we handle that, or if you want to constrain the menu text. In certain circumstances, I think it's a good idea to constrain the text and add, you know, the ellipses to it if it exceeds the length. But in this case, we don't want to have a menu item that has ... in it. We don't want to have a menu item that goes underneath the thing. So we're going to have to leave it up to the designer who's using our widget or our component to actually find a label that fits within their layout. So I'm not going to bother with the constraint at this time. All right, so we've got a pretty functional looking item. If I get rid of the stroke over here, and this should be a pretty much of a drop-in replacement for this item here. So I can select it, I can copy it, I can go over here into my hierarchy, find the item, the topmost item in the hierarchy, and I can press Control-Shift-R or Command-Shift-R on the Mac. And you can see it, okay, I've got it, it's a little bit longer than the item was originally, so you can sort of figure out what your length is there. And it's done. So the drop-in replacement worked pretty well, and then we just have to sort of fiddle with our margins. And what you'd probably do is you'd remove each one of these, and you'd replace them as well. But we're not done. We're not done. We want to make this into a really functional component. So let's do that. So the first thing, of course, to turn something into a component is to right-click on it and say Create Component or Command-Option-K. All right, so now you can see by the little 4 diamonds there that this is now a component. All right, so what are some of the things that we can do to make this component really functional and interesting? First thing is, well, let's make the text editable. In order to demonstrate what we're doing here, I'm just going to Alt-click and drag this component. This is going to be our tester here, and we're going to use, you know, anything we do over here, we're going to test it out with this instance, which will delete it eventually. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is be able to make it easy to change the text. So I've clicked on the text element here, and now that it's a component, if I go to my actual text item, where here we can see the text that I can change, this icon here is going to allow us to create a property. Give it a name, so I'm going to call this menu, we can call it menu text, create a property. Okay, so what does that look like when we look at the instance? Now when I click on the instance, you can see that I actually have a property here in the instance. So whatever I type in here actually goes in there. And if I make a duplicate of that, I can give this some other name. And you can see how easy it's going to be for me to create a menu, because now I can just go down here and just change the names as I go. And in fact, you know, a great way to create a menu, let's just give myself a bit more room, is if I start to take these items, let's turn this into its own auto layout group, which is how you'd want to create a menu. So I'm going to press Shift A. Shift A is a quick and easy way of putting a frame around the items. So you can see here, test menu. Put a frame around the items, and then we can automatically have auto layout applied. And I got the vertical auto layout, which is perfect. Left align is fine, and a zero gap. I can decide what we want as a gap between the menu items. I'm going to say a zero gap. What's beautiful about this is now if I hit Command D to duplicate the menu item, boom, I get a bunch of things. And now watch how easy it is to change the text. I can just click on this one. Okay, we've got that. If I hit the Tab key, it selects the next one down the list, and I can change that to something else, and hit the Tab key again, and change that. Double click and type in something new. I don't know, what am I typing in? Whatever, right? You can just keep going through there. So that's really very, very convenient. Okay, let's continue to enhance our menu here. The next thing is not all of these are going to have little notification badges, right? So why don't we find the notification? There it is. And we're going to go back into our component. So this is our main component, right? Not our instances here, main component. And I'm looking for the layer, because the layer allows me to hide or show that thing, right? Same thing as if I did it down here. However, I can also turn that layer hide show into a property, which Figma calls a Boolean property, which comes to us from mathematics, when something can be either on or off. So a Boolean property can either be hidden or shown. That's it. Click on that. Give it a name. It's already chosen a nice name, show notification. Where did I get that word notification? From the name of the layer that I'm showing or hiding. So that's perfect. And I'm going to choose the default. So when I create a new instance of this, do I want this automatically to be showing the notification, or do I want the notification to be automatically hidden? So I'm going to say I want the notification to be by default hidden, and I'm going to create that property. So that also then hides the instance here. But if I want to say, oh, you know what, service had a notification, then I've got my show notification option now, which allows me to turn that on. So that's cool. So this is super functional. Now, one next level would be to be able to type in what the actual number of the notification is. I'm going to leave that for a future tutorial because then we're getting into kind of nested instances and so forth. But it's already a really great improvement. So we've got the ability to change the text. We've got the ability to show the notification. What about if we wanted to demonstrate a menu that was actually open, right? If we wanted the menu to be open, then we're going to want to have this chevron here, or this disclosure icon. We want that kind of reversed or pointing in the opposite direction. So there's a couple of different strategies you could do. You could create variants. A variant is a way of saying, okay, this is a component. I want to show a component where the menu is open, where the menu is closed. We can absolutely do that. You just have to start to be careful about variants. If you start getting into multiple a matrix of variants, multiple different variants. So for example, let's say we had variants for rollover, clicked, selected, and normal. So that's one set of things, which we might call state. But then we might also want to have the menu open or closed. And we want to be able to have every combination and permutation of that. So every combination of open and closed menus with every state, rollover, hover, selected, and so forth. That starts to become a lot of variants to manage. So there may be an easier way to do this particular thing. If we can isolate the open closed to this element itself, then we can use a feature called nested components or nested instances, and we can actually use that instead. So watch how that works. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to extract this, because right now we've got this thing called dropdown, and I'm just going to actually copy and paste it over here. And this is going to turn into a new component. So we're going to have a nested component, which we're going to use to replace this kind of just static graphic here. Now, again, we're going to inspect this, and we see that, oh, there's a level of nesting that's not really necessary here. So I'm going to actually ungroup the first one, and I'm going to rename this to disclosure. And then I'm going to turn that into a component again by just saying create component. So now I have this disclosure component, and just inside there is just a shape. Perfect. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a variant. And the way you can start off by creating a new variant for this component, once it's been turned into a component, you go to the main component, and over here under properties, we can add a new property and choose, I'm going to create a new variant. Let's say, okay, well, what's that variant? By default, it calls the variant property 1, and the value is default. Let's change that by clicking on this little icon. I really don't like the UI for changing these because you can double click on property. You can't double click on the values. That's really annoying. So the property is going to be state, and the default value, yay. Here we go. Here we go. Tom and the properties. The default value, we're going to call that. This is when it's closed. So the menu is not open, it's closed, and the arrow is pointing in the direction that we want it to click. Okay, great. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create another variant of that same property. See how we can have state is closed? So I'm going to duplicate that with Command D. You can also click on the plus icon. Command D. Now you can see that aesthetically that isn't great. I really want that to be sort of enclosed in here. So what you can do is you can actually, once you decide that you're creating variants, you get this little variant group that it sort of shows that, but it's actually a frame with even with a dash on it and everything. It can be completely styled. So I'm going to use the auto layout feature to style that. We're just going to say, there we go. We want that. We're going to put a gap between them. Where'd the other variant go? Well, we got clip content turned on, which isn't ideal, but we've also got our width constrained to a fixed width. We don't want that. We want it to hug the contents. You'll see that that actually will automatically grow. So if I were to create multiple versions of this, you can see that that thing grows automatically. So that's, again, just by virtue of a good knowledge of using auto layout on this parent element here. And then how do you make it grow? You set it to hug its contents. And in this case, along its width. Okay, great. So now we've got our second option. Let's take a look at that variant. It's called state, but it just calls it state 2. So we want that to be open. All right, now how do we actually change this? Well, we obviously know we need to rotate this 90 degrees or negative 90 degrees. It already seems to be rotated, but we don't want to rotate the actual element. In fact, to be honest, I think both of these should be set to 0. So they'll be pointing up. And then we go into the actual shape, and I'll set that guy to 90 degrees, and I'll set this guy to negative 90 degrees. I just didn't want the variant itself to have the rotation applied to it in case that meant that it didn't get applied when we use it as an instance. Okay, so let's just take a look. What we're going to do is we're just going to grab one of these. I'll option drag it out. This is our tester. And now you can see it's got 2 states, closed and open. Beautiful. So now we're going to use that instance. I'm going to cut that. I'm going to go back to our menu item. I'm going to double click on this item. So make sure I've got that top level drop down. And I'm going to use Command Shift R again, which is, let me show you where the menu is. It is paste to replace. Okay, awesome. The only downside here is that it's forgotten about its positioning. So we got to go and set it back to absolute positioning, and we're going to move it over to where we want it to go. And actually, in this case, having all these instances is really helpful. It's also dropped it below our notification again, so we're going to have to drag that up there so that the notification works correctly. Okay, so at this point, we haven't done too much that's going to be useful here. You can see one of the things we can do is with an instance, Figma does allow you to double-click into the element, this item here, for example, and I can actually then change it. I can change that state to open or closed. But that's actually one more click than I even need to do if I set this up correctly. So I'm going to go back to my parent instance, my main component, and under properties, I'm going to hit the plus button. You can see we already have the 2 properties, right? Our menu text and the ability to show or hide the notification. I'm going to add another property, and it's going to surface a property or a variant property of the nested instance. So I'm going to choose that. I'm going to say, yeah, this is the nested instance, the disclosure icon. You'll see why this is important to be able to choose what you want to expose, because you don't always want to expose every single property of every single subcomponent. But now that means that when I go down to here, I now have an additional ability right here from the main section to change the state of my menu. So it's changed the state of the disclosure, I guess, without having to drill into the disclosure. So that makes it really easy. And then I can also, multi-select these guys. Actually, that's not great. Let's do that. Select that, maybe select that one. And I can just, I can change all these. What you can't do, though, you can't change the nested instance of a multi-selection, unfortunately. So you still need to kind of go and do that one at a time. All right. Finally, I think the last thing we can do to improve this is let's make the icon, because you're going to want to have different icons for each of these. So we should make those icons variable as well. So the icons should be components as well. And you can see that this icon actually came from the Iconly set. So I went on and took a look, downloaded the free version of the Iconly set. I grabbed a couple of icons there, and I'm just going to copy them and I'm going to paste them into my document so that they're available here. And there they are, the ones. Now you can see that they're kind of haphazardly grouped together. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to frame this selection. Command Option G, but I'll show you where that is. It's over here, frame the selection. In fact, you know what? I can even save myself another step by actually saying Add Auto Layout, which will frame it and then apply Auto Layout. So it just saves me one click. Let's do that. Apply Auto Layout. And it's kind of chosen, actually it's chosen very close to what I would have chosen myself. I would have chosen this wraparound, right, version. I probably would have aligned it to the top left, but it doesn't make a difference. And then I'm going to set this to 20. Oh no, hey now. 20. And I'm going to set that to 20. And then you can see that this makes for a really great way to kind of arrange icons as you create new icons, right? It does that. So that's really a convenient way to have icons. And maybe I'll name this frame Iconly icons. Now, one thing you'll notice when I copied and pasted from the Iconly Figma file is that these are all standalone components which have the same structure. This is fantastic. This is actually what you want when you're going to be using icon swapping, is you would like them all to at least have the same naming structure. So you can see where the good use of the slashes to create those sort of subgroups. So this is icon and then bold. So these are all part of the bold set. And then we have the various icon names there. So that's a great way of setting up the components. You don't have to create variants. I've seen people create like one icon component and then there's multiple variants. That's another way that you can approach this, but you don't need to go that extra step if they're all named correctly. All right, so what are we going to do? We're going to take this icon, it just doesn't matter which one. I'm going to copy it so that I've got an instance in the clipboard. Now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to find this guy. By the way, in order to quickly drill into an item, you can see I can click on this, then I can double click and get to it, or I can go the opposite direction. I can hold down the command key or the control key on the PC, and that allows me to select individual elements. It goes to the deepest nesting level often, and then I can click on that, and then I can see where it is in the hierarchy, and I can then choose the icon, the level that I want, or I can press Shift Enter, and that drops me up, pushes me up a level, similar to the way Enter drops you down a level. So I've used Shift Enter to pop up again. So if I select a really deeply nested level, and then I press Shift Enter, and I press Shift Enter again, and now I've got the icon, the top level of that thing selected. So remember, I had this icon in my paste buffer, so I'm going to do Command Shift R. All right, and then we're going to colorize it with some other random text color. This is one area that Figma still struggles with. It's really important if you're going to create icons that are supposed to remember the color when you swap them, that the icon structure themselves are equivalent. So I'm not sure that this is actually set up that way, right? Because they've got this group which is actually unnecessary. I would actually want to ungroup that, but let's just see what happens. But if we have a problem where it doesn't remember the color, then we might want to ungroup it, because you really just need to have the vector by itself exposed within the component, and then the vector, you can apply the colors to it, and it should remember those colors when you're applying it to your menu item. So right now we've got this icon in here. Doesn't really do much for us here. If I can go in here, I could actually right click on that icon and I could say swap instance, and you'll see that it automatically selects the 5 items here, and it's doing that by virtue of their naming convention, their naming structure. So I could manually swap my icons here, the way I could have manually gone in and opened up my disclosure and changed its variant state. But I can do this even more conveniently by going to my primary component, my main component, selecting the instance that I want to be able to do a swap on, and then you're probably guessing how this works. You've seen this icon a few times now. If I click on that, it's going to create an instance swap property. It's perfect. So I click on that, and I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call that, what's the menu icon? And we'll get to preferred values in just a minute, but we're going to leave that as it is for now. So now let's go over here and see what we can do here. So immediately we can just select the different icons because they all follow the same naming convention. Now, if they didn't, or if there was only a subset of those icons that I felt was appropriate to be used in the menu, when I go into here, when I added that property, or I can go back to my properties here. Let's see, I'm going to go over to here, take a look at my properties. Nope, sorry, don't want to add a new property. I'm going to go in here, going to go to my menu icon, going to edit that property, and then you can see I have preferred values. Right now there's only one in there, but I can go in and I can say, okay, let's add a whole bunch of preferred values, and I can navigate through my document structure until I find the ones I want to add, and I can just manually add them one by one. If I want them all, then I just select them all. Or if I don't want one of them to be available, then I hide it. And what that's basically going to do, let's hide these two just to illustrate. So what that basically is going to do is now when I go in here and I choose the icon swap, you can see it's only showing me 3 out of the 5 because those other 2 were not in the preferred. I can still get to them the long way around by going to local components and then, dragging around till I find it, and there they all are available. You can see that there's a number of clicks in there. So it's really great to set up your preferred icons. So again, let's go here, preferred, open up that property, go to our preferred values, add some more. It already kind of knows where the majority came from, so you can navigate there. If I had other icons using a different naming convention, I can still pop out here and add them in to my preferred. So you can actually mix and match instances or components from different naming schemes if you want to, and add them to your preferred. All right, so now we've got a pretty darn functional menu, right, where we can change our icons, we can edit our text, we can turn on whether or not we show notifications, and we can change the state of our disclosure. So now let's just look at variants if I really wanted to take this to the next level from a mock-up perspective. So I'll just get my test menu out of the way. And all right. So we're going to go to this menu item here, and now I'm going to actually create variants. So back to my properties. We already saw how to create a variant using this disclosure here. So let's do that again. We're going to go over to properties. We're going to say new variant. Okay. And what's the name of the variant? I'm going to call this state. And I'm happy actually to have my first state be a default state. And in preparation for adding more variants, I'm going to go to my menu item. I'm going to add auto layout. I'm going to make it a vertical auto layout with no spaces in between so that it kind of mimics how this looks. I find it's easier if your variants kind of mimic the way they're going to be used. And so here's our default variant. All right, so I'm going to duplicate that, Command D, and it's going to say, okay, what's that? Well, let's call this our rollover or our hover state. Okay. What do we want to do for a hover state? I think we're just going to change the background color. We're going to keep it really simple. I'm just going to quickly check to see if there's any elements that, yep. So I'm just going to change the background color right on the main instance. And let's see, oh, look at that. This fill already has, they already had something in there, but that's kind of bold. And I have to, it's really bold for a hover, I think. So what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to, there we go. Just going to use a little bit of an off gray. In order for me to better test this, let's set the background color of this thing to white because I'm going to use that on my menu. There we go. Okay, so now I can see that's the hover. And it kind of makes me wish that this had rounded corners, but anyway, that's fine. We're going to leave it as is. I changed the background. I can change anything here. If I wanted to change the text to make it more legible, let's say I want to make that text black in this particular state, then we can do that as well. Maybe we'll make that black as well to show the user that, so that doesn't have a fill. I mean, it does, but it's not the icon that's got the fill. It's the vector inside it. So I'll get to it via the selection colors. This is one of the most useful features of Figma. Honestly, I'm constantly grateful that they include this. It gives you a list of all the colors used on everything, and you can just swap those colors out right there and there. So that's really great. Let's just do that. Okay, I'll leave the icon the gray that it is. Okay, so this is now, so there's our default. Now we've got our hover. We want to show what does it look like when a menu item is actually selected. So I can choose whichever one of these is closest to what I think the design of the next state's going to look like. In this case, I think it's this one. Command D again, and that's going to be selected or active. This is our active menu item. And what we'll do here is, why don't we change it more dramatically? Let's change that background fill to the blue, or to something like the blue. There, that's pretty nice. And then for that, I think, from a legibility perspective, we're probably going to be better off, since this is a little on the dark side. We probably want to do some accessibility testing on this, but I'm assuming that, we're going to want to go with white. Now watch this. So what I can do here is I can select the entire instance, or this, I guess the entire variant. Here are my selection colors, right? So everything that's black is currently the text. That's what I want to become white. So we do that. And then let's do the same thing for the icon. This is the icon color here, and I'm also going to make that white. Now, typically I wouldn't be using whoa. Let's do that again. So this guy here. Typically I'd actually be using predefined colors in the library, but we're keeping this quick and dirty. All right. So how do we use that? So now we have these variants. So now in my sample menu, right, we can put that test menu. So I can say, okay, you know what? Is for mock-up purposes, because I'm mocking up my UI, I'm going to show that I'd like to show this, so that this one here is set to hover. And I want to show in my mock-up that this is actually the currently active menu item. So there you go. So now I've got a very, very functional menu. We call this our menu list, right? And I could use that, and potentially I could replace this. I'm not sure if this is structured in such a way that it's going to be easy to, if I got menu items, there we go, menu list. All right, so if I select this guy, copy it, go over here, and Command Shift R, there we go. It's just a little on the big side, so I can just pull that in, make it match. And there we go. So now we've got a very functional menu list that's been set up. And I can go in here and for my various pages, I can mock it up and I can say, okay, this is what a hover looks like, and I can annotate that, and away we go. So I hope this was useful. I hope this also whets your appetite. I'll try to do more of these. There's so much functionality that we can build into Figma to make prototyping much, much faster. Once you take the extra time to build that component properly, you have lots of flexibility. As you saw, if somebody came and said, the art director came and said, hey, you know what, the whole menu is just a little bit too narrow, too wide. With a little bit more work here, I could actually make this thing kind of self-adjust, right? So if I go to my menu list, I can say, you know what, I want to, yeah, it's already doing that. I want it to fill the parent container. So if I got this parent container and I say, you know what, we're going to make that menu wider. Oh, that didn't actually work the way I was hoping it would work, because we've got a bunch of extra unnecessary. Again, this is why you don't want to have unnecessary nesting, because things don't work the way you expect it to. We could work that out. I'm not going to bother right now, but just to sort of explain to you why the extra effort here is worth it, it really makes prototyping so much faster and easier. Anyway, hope this was really useful. Hope it was entertaining. Please leave a comment below if you think that this is something you'd like to see more of. If you have a specific question, by all means, put it in there. I do read my comments about once a year, so don't be too upset if I don't get back to you. I'll try to be more proactive about that going forward. Anyway, thanks so much. We'll see you in the next one.